So good morning and good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to our sixth webinar, Knowledge into Policy and Going Beyond Context Matters. I'm Vanesa Weyrauch, co-founder of Politics and Ideas, and Politics and Ideas jointly has developed this series of webinars to share our study on context. Today we also have as a guest Leonardo Garnier, who was the former Minister of Education and also Minister of Planning and Economic Policy in Costa Rica, and I'll introduce him better in the second part of our session. Thank you for being here. I hope some more participants will join as we move forward. We had more than 100 people registering, so hopefully some more will be able to make it today. Otherwise, we're also recording the session, so we'll share the recorded session along with the PowerPoint that you will see today later on. So don't worry that all the information that we're sharing will be in your hands. We'll ask all participants to please post comments and questions through the chat. It's the way we have participation. I'll start sharing the agenda and I'll let you know when are the moments to come in with questions and comments, which are more than welcome. So before moving on, if someone can tell me whether everything you're listening well and I can start sharing the agenda. Is it fine? Is the sound okay? Hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. So our idea today is to briefly share for those who are attending the first time the background of our study and why we did it. And then we'll center our attention in one of the main dimensions of context that we discovered through this study, which is the intra and interrelationships with state and non-state stakeholders. And within those relationships, of course, we will also identify several subdimensions that recurrently appear as bearing weight in the way knowledge is used in policy. Then we'll invite Leonardo to join in and share two stories about these relationships in his experience in Costa Rica. And I'll invite you to join me in a participatory interview to him based on what he shares and also related aspects of relationships in general. And we'll close up with some final remarks and share with you what's next within our plan area in trying to better understand and use context to promote a culture of interaction between knowledge and policy. So INASP and Politics and Ideas embarked on this study to systematize knowledge around how context operates. Context is we understand context as the governmental agency in itself because it's the natural setting, the day-to-day scenario interaction between policy and knowledge can take place. And within these public agencies, there are 6 main dimensions. We have explored 5 of them in our previous webinars, and we are today centering our attention in the number 2. 5 dimensions are the macro context, right, that surrounds the work of the state agency. This is the state agency, and there's a macro context with factors that affects the whole play, the whole game, I would say. Then we have intra and interrelationships with diverse stakeholders, the culture, the organizational capacity, the management and processes within public agencies, and other resources. Anyone interested who hasn't joined the previous webinars will also share by the end of today the link to the recorded versions of other webinars if you're interested in learning more about the other dimensions. As a result of the study, access here are the links to. We have the conceptual framework, the graph that you have just seen in a narrative version with all the details about each dimension. And we also produced a practical paper because we thought it was important to identify practices from governmental agencies, and also develop a set of implications for those who are interested in applying a better understanding of context in the way you devise and implement changes to promote the interaction between research and policy. And these together are synthesized and are presented in a more dynamic way in our interactive project, which I will share shortly. And you also have the link there to visit the interactive project and learn more about, including all the set of implications that are presented according to different type of users. So today, we're going to center the attention, and I think it's great that due to the different guests' availability, we are able to close the series with such an important dimension, which is the relationships among stakeholders and the relationships of the public agency with non-state stakeholders. And I believe this dimension is key because it can certainly affect very intensely the other dimensions, right? The way relationships are created and nurtured can produce important changes in terms of the culture of a governmental agency, its organizational capacity, management and processes. Like all those dimensions are embedded and are changed according to how relationships are established. So it's nice that we're closing up with using this lens today, looking at how a governmental agency can make better use of relationships with other governmental agencies with which it needs to interact through policy design and implementation, and also with relevant stakeholders who are also producers and users of knowledge, and which will probably affect also the way information flows and is used within the agency. And this is, relationships are very natural, right? I think that the reason, as this quote shows up, sorry about that, the phone ringing, we naturally interact with others and form networks. This is the way life works, right? And usually, I mean, there's this learning that comes out from biology and the way we are as human beings, that connecting with others and organs connecting among themselves, the costs of all those connections clearly outweigh, the benefits clearly outweigh the costs of building up those connections and making those connections work well. So even though we need to acknowledge that relationships are complex and that they demand a lot of energy and sometimes they are really difficult, to take a look at those relationships, identify which ones are more fruitful and make use of them and nurture them so that we can come up with better ways of using knowledge in policy. So this dimension is key and it has a lot of potential, and we'll explore now which type of relationships and stakeholders and what is recurrent, what we have seen throughout our study, which are the factors within those relationships that frequently appear as dilemmas or challenges, and as well as opportunities for those policymakers or people working with policymakers who want to create a better culture and use of knowledge in policy. So let us start first with the stakeholders, like those belonging to the public agency where policymakers work or other public agencies. This, of course, is the part of this natural setting, and these are the more frequent interactions and the daily interactions that policymakers have affecting whichever role they play out in policy. And the main question, as you will be here, and an invitation to answer, is to think how functional is your system, right? Which type of connections and how these connections work among state agencies to enable and distribution of knowledge to inform policy. So as you will see, first, one of the subdimensions has to do exactly with the flow of information. The way the information naturally flows or not between different state agencies allows or helps the use and the sharing and the co-production sometimes of knowledge that is relevant for policy. Here we found that usually there's a significant difference between decentralized and centralized, right? The centralized systems, of course, sometimes allow the production of more, I would say, homogeneous and solid and consistent information, but within those type of systems, many times policymakers face challenges in terms of allowing that information flows to other agencies at the subnational and local levels. For example, we found a case study in Mexico where a very hierarchical management of information deterred the flow of information to other potential users and other potential contributions to that information. While also when systems are very decentralized, the challenge becomes to kind of integrate and to see how the information that is produced and used is has some common codes, ways of understanding, etc. Very decentralized systems can end up in a myriad of information systems and of data and research production ways, and this also is a challenge in terms of integrating the information and making evidence work in a way to support national level decisions. This links very nice to what is related to the degree of coordination among agencies, right? The lack of coordination naturally and obviously deters a good use of the available knowledge for policy. And for example, in the case of Indonesia, for example, there's the existing regulations for evaluating and managing civil servants provoke that many times the more technical staff, the bureaucrats, work in a very isolated way and very detached from the decision-making spaces. And this, of course, creates silos where decision-making goes on through one avenue, and technocrats do not have the incentives to make sure that the evidence they are managing really informs and is relevant to the questions that the policymakers in the very dynamic decision-making arena are. So this also has to do, coordination has to do with approach to policy, and a counter example of this would be, for instance, in Cape Town in South Africa, there was a large initiative for urban regeneration, which required naturally, because the area of intervention was the city, the place, the territory, and whenever you want to enhance a territory, you have a territorial approach, of course, that you'll be looking into all the policies that reach that place, and the need for integration is larger. So in that case, there was a very high interaction, not only among departments in the municipality to kind of come up with knowledge and relevant data for aspects of urban regeneration, but also with non-state stakeholders making good use of the available local knowledge in civil society organizations, a university, even business companies and businessmen. So coordination when policy requires, and with the policy approach, social protection is a clear example of the type of approach in policy that requires coordination in itself, really benefits and enhances the potential to integrate work with other stakeholders and come up with common ways to generate and use evidence and to share evidence, because the whole knowledge is needed to see whether an intervention that has to do or comes from the health department is an intervention that is benefiting some education or is deriving into some expected education outcomes, for instance. Then the most of the public agencies do count with some sort of support of other governmental agencies that are specifically created and designed to produce data. National statistics departments of agencies of office would be the clear example of this. The kind of support that your public agency or the public agency you're working with has or not from such type of agencies, it can also be national science councils or research councils, is key, right? It's part of the knowledge infrastructure within state that is available. But sometimes, of course, there are challenges in terms of how that information produces data that is of direct use and is relevant, or many times is really comes up to the levels of detail that some agencies need. So a good interaction with those governmental agencies in the way of working together to identify how and which data and how data need to be collected works really well. While examples like in my country in Argentina, where for many years the national statistics were manipulated and there was a lack of trust, this really produced a very important obstacle, not only for state agencies from belonging to other political parties or at the subnational level who couldn't count with reliable national information, but even with non-state stakeholders, right, that need some basic data that only the state at the national level can collect. So the type of support and also the way other governmental agencies require or not the use of knowledge within the policy process is important. Another example could be the Chilean budget department, which really works in a way where the assignment and the allocation of resources is completely linked with the evidence presented by different ministers in terms of why, what needs to be done and with which amount of the budget. So there's no way they will be able to make their case without producing evidence. That's part of the way things work and the way the budget department works. So when there's support from those agencies that produce and that don't, they produce data, in this case, that budget, but they also use evidence from others. When there's these agencies are present, there are larger incentives and a larger chances that the use of evidence will be embedded in policy discussions and decisions. Then let's pay some attention, of course, to the capacity. This is not only about having systems, processes for data generation or the need for coordination from the policy approach, but we have found out not only in this study, but also throughout our courses with policymakers, is that there's a very heterogeneous capacity among public agencies. So the need, I mean, one could have the willingness, and there could be, sometimes there's enough willingness and interest to better incorporate knowledge into policy, but then there's lack of analytical skills, of people producing good synthesis of evidence. So these differences among capacity can really deter how much different agencies can interact, or your own agency can work with others to make sure that research is used in a good way. This also represents an opportunity for those who are more champions. There are also examples of how public agencies that have become kind of stars, because even media is featuring the way they produce and use evidence, can become examples and inspiring drivers for others to join that path. And there are also even examples of coordinated policies where some departments or some secretaries have worked with others and helped them develop this capacity. But still, it is a challenge, and sometimes resources or time is not enough to do this, and this can become a problem, even while we are convinced about the need to strengthen the intra-relationships within the state. So I'll speak a little bit about stakeholders, but if you have any questions or things that come up as I'm talking about the dilemmas, challenges, and opportunities with state actors, please begin to write them, because once I'm finished, we'll have a chance to interact, and I can make further clarifications or respond to your doubts or even reactions or comments you might have based on your own experiences. So besides this complex world of intra-relationships, where one needs to think more thoroughly about how to make the best use of the available structures, processes, and people within the state who are producing or using research, there's a whole world outside as well, a large world outside, which is the non-stakeholders, right? As we were seeing in our graph. And let me now, maybe we can, within this, take a look at our framework. As you will see, if I'm here in the, if you click on each dimension with our interactive product, you will see that within intra-relationships, we have all these sub-dimensions that I've mentioned recently. You have here also practices. If we, let me put it again in a more clear way, the graph, so that we can see that within, not within each public agency has the, which are these gray, yes, we have just the relationships between the gray circles, the different state agencies. But of course, within the external world, there are a lot of different stakeholders that affect very significantly the culture and the way research is produced and used, ranging from the citizens, but also citizens organized within movements or civil society organizations, universities and research organizations, donors, private companies, media, right? There are a lot of interactions with them and also interactions among them that can affect your efforts to promote the use of research in policy. Sorry about that. So going back to our focus right now, which is this word of non-state stakeholders, what appeared clearly is that whenever there are already existing policy forums or epistemic communities, the chances that research is produced and used within policy making processes is larger. Policy forums are existing communities, groups of policymakers, experts, academics, sometimes depending on the type of policy. It could be also civil society organizations, businessmen and unions, etc. When there are these groups that have a regular space in which they interact and discuss policy-related issues, there's a better chance that a policymaker or governmental agency can participate or interact in some way and draw evidence from those forums. Same happens with epistemic communities. The difference is that epistemic policy forums are quite diverse. It means that people are discussing but do not necessarily and usually do not share views or do not share a common vision of that policy, while epistemic communities usually gather people together who have a shared understanding of the problem and a shared approach, approach in terms of how that policy problem should be addressed. And of course, here, for a policymaker to interact with a epistemic community, it's important to be aware of what unites that group and what that group stands for, that epistemic community, but also try to complement whatever comes from these epistemic communities with others that are different or think differently, or other stakeholders that can kind of bring in also other types of understandings and of ways of framing problems and proposing policy alternatives. But for sure, when these spaces where research is already circulating, where research is already appreciated and is being used and produced, are natural spaces where governmental agencies can look at and interact with. Sometimes we've seen examples also of policymakers using these spaces as soundboards for ideas, right? It can be a good space to kind of complement the knowledge one policymaker has, or also to consult about potential designs or this in an existing policy, and in one unique space gather the evidence and knowledge available to inform that decision. This also is applicable to formal channels of interaction. There are some governmental agencies who have set up some sort of partnerships or alliances with research institutions or with the universities. There's a very nice example at Politics and Ideas. We also have the written case of the university, the Manila University in Philippines, where the public policy program has developed regular work with students where they meet with municipality agents, and they jointly defined a research agenda so that students are researching and looking for knowledge that those policymakers require and need. This is just one example, but there are lots of opportunities to tap and to devise some more formal ways, be it a program to develop an agenda or to do some joint research. So this formal interaction also becomes a natural space to develop the needed trust among the state and non-state stakeholders. And there's, of course, the requirement usually is that both those researchers and institutions need to have enough time and energy to participate and to provide ideas and come up with proposals and solutions. And also for policymakers, this type of channels can become quite time consuming. So being strategic about how it is focused and how the work will be done jointly is very important. Within researchers also, we have found that international experts in many countries play a significant role, and having some spaces to tap into those experts and ideally combine their expertise with local agents' use and their local own production is very important. I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of relationships with donors, right? Many of those international experts manage research projects that are supported by external donors. Of course, for many of you, it's also expected that civil society actors, citizens, like citizen movements and organized civil, also very important players in the way that knowledge is incorporated or not into discussions and decisions. This means that sometimes when there are very powerful, I would say, pressure groups, groups that have a wide array of resources and their voice is heard across different actors, and when those with very clear and vested interests in a policy issue, when those beliefs, values are very strong, the chances of incorporating knowledge into the decision diminishes. So usually with groups that are faith-based or very value-driven, the discussions and the way they influence has more to do with beliefs and values and ideas, and less with the evidence available. But in general, if countries where citizens are more literate and have had the chance to access to better education opportunities and appreciate the use of research, this also builds into a culture of government using more and more research. This is not also a linear effect, but the tendency is that as education, as people get more education chances, the demand from them for policymakers to base their decisions or demonstrate what data or information they're using to base their decisions increases. Developments like the open development where or big data, other international pushes that then take are embedded, also are taken, are owned by national spaces or groups are very important, and this increasing demand to produce and use reliable data, international and national data, is clear out there. All the movements in terms of open government and being able to see what the government is using and producing has enabled a lot of opportunities for a wider use of research in policy. And finally, of course, that this is different in different countries, but relationships with the donors are key, right? There are countries where most of the research production budget comes from the contribution of external donors from other countries. So even though at some point this long-term functional role that some external donors can have in terms of building and culture and building capacity to produce and use research, sometimes this leads into a lack of incentives for internal reform. So in some way, research is completely outsourced to international experts or some local experts with contracts with these donors, where the agenda also is heavily influenced by donors. So we found that there needs to be a strategic way to take the best out of the opportunities that donors bring, but also try to see how to combine that with local interest and capacity to develop local capacity. And local capacity also sometimes is not enough. Of course, if you have a really committed group of technocrats that produce good evidence, but political leadership is not convinced at all about the need to incorporate evidence, the research papers and will stay in the technocrats' offices. So, and also the final point about donors is that sometimes this leads to avoiding showing negative results because it's not in the interest of the donor nor the governmental agency when results are not good, and this also can become a conflict of interest. So many non-state stakeholders to take into account. This is a complex network of internal and external stakeholders to look at, but hopefully I've been able to share the highlights of these relationships and give you some information about the things we need to be careful about and take a look at to both manage strategically the threats or the potential dilemmas, but also capitalize on what you already have there that can be used to enhance the culture of a public agency in terms of policy and knowledge. So this is the general setting where I'll introduce Leonardo soon. I just want to ask you if you have any questions or comments related to this. You can write them now. I'll wait to see whether there's something. Otherwise, I'm sure we'll have much more fun listening to how this plays out in the real life with Leonardo's experience. Okay, I see no questions coming in. I'll be glad to introduce Leonardo. Leonardo currently is the Associate Professor of Economics at the Universidad de Costa Rica. And as I mentioned at the beginning of our webinar, he served as Minister of Education from 2006 to 2010, and then also from 2010 to 2014. He also served as Minister of Planning and Economic Policy from 1994 to 1998, so a lot of years and experience in very critical policymaking roles. He's also an expert and a researcher. He has published many articles on economic and social issues and has authored a book that's called Costa Rica, an almost successful underdeveloped country, which for sure might be a very good book to complement what we will hear today. So Leonardo, let's see if we can hear you well. I'll invite you to come in. Thank you very much. Leave you to the people.
Hello, Vanessa. It's a pleasure as always. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, I can hear. Thank you for waking up early. It's 7:30 in Costa Rica, so thanks for being here. And I leave you now to share your stories, and then we'll continue with some questions so that we can talk about and make the most of your experience. So I'll switch my video and audio off in the meantime, and then I'll come back again.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon to everybody. And Vanessa has to share a couple of experiences in these relationships. First, between government agencies and then between a government agency and a non-state or non-government agency. In terms of also in terms of their use of information. Uh, First, what I'd like to say is that the traditional approaches to public policy and planning are usually intended for governments to define from the outset and detail the goals, objectives, timelines, and resources with which those objectives are achieved. But that is not always consistent with reality. One must have is a clear sense of direction, a reasonable order of magnitudes, and the ability and the flexibility to build from there. Uh, you never you do that in a very creative way, not in a very predefined instructions, not in a very detailed. You never know from the start the details of what you will find when you're working. In short, uh, what I would say is that it is always important to have the sense of direction and as much information as possible, but you shouldn't be paralyzed by the absence of detailed information. In politics, you will never have perfect information. In politics, you must improvise just as you do in jazz. You're never in like in the classical music metaphor that you have the musical score from the beginning. You build that score as you go on. The first example I like to use is the relation with the Ministry of Finance, which is always the most difficult relation for a sectoral ministry like education, for example, or public works or agriculture. The relation with the Ministry of Finance is always very uh, complicated. It's almost like an adversarial relationship, and usually sectoral ministries feel like uh, you're the minister who are trying to do something, and the finance minister is the minister that is trying not to let you do the things you're trying to do. And of course, the minister of finance is the one that feels that everybody else is trying to spend money, or you're the responsible one. You're trying to balance the budget, and everybody else is trying to unbalance the budget. And it's very difficult to get this very different. So
Hello. Yes, Leonardo. I don't know if you can hear me, but I can't hear you well. I see here Hola Jumoke is writing to see whether, and Leandro is telling me that he's not hearing you either. Okay, I think he's switched his audio off. Sorry about that. Someone was responding. Let's see if now it works well. Leonardo,
Yes? No?
sorry about that. I think we lost you. I thought it was all only me, but we
Oh,
lost you. Yes, sorry. Can
all
you
right.
just, yeah, I lost you when you were starting to speak about how for Minister of Finance it's this natural demand that you have on resources and allocation. We lost you there.
Okay. Okay, what I was saying is that for the Ministry of Finance, it's very important that you explain to them not only the amount of resources you need, but the timing of those resources. You have to have your priorities clear. You have to know how much do you need for the resources, but the timing of those resources. Another
Right.
thing that is very important. Yes, is it clear now?
We
Okay.
hear you well. Yes, very clearly.
Okay.
Thanks.
Then one second thing I would like to say in this relationship with the Ministry of Finance is, and this is very useful if you really want to go further in this relationship, is you would like to win the Ministry of Finance to your side in a very different, from a very different perspective. Usually, uh, ministers, or I don't want to put this in terms of the ministers as a person, but rather as an institution. Uh, Ministries of Finance or Ministerios de Hacienda uh, are seen as the ministries of the money or the resources, not the ministries that do things. And for example, I was working in education, and education spends a lot of money. It's probably in Costa Rica is the ministry that spends most of the nice things in education, and finance ministry is like the bad guys, not allowance. And it's really easy that around and putting a nice face into the finance ministry. And I will use like example which in, can turn into the best example. We had to increase wages, and that means tons of money because you have a lot of teachers. It's the biggest uh, uh, amount of money in the public budget. For the Ministry of Finance, it's terrible when you say, okay, we are going to just that is going to mean a huge increase in your budget, and these guys are economists, and so you have to have this conversation saying, why is it that I want to increase wages for teachers? Uh, One way to see it is just a waste of money. You're going to increase my budget, increase my deficit. This is terrible. This is going to do a lot of harm to the macroeconomic things. And you say, well, let's look at this as economists. As economists, we are used as signals. And when you change prices, these are incentives for people to do things. And we as economists, we like to see things as investments and long-term investments. And when you see education, you want to talk about the quality of education. You want to improve quality of education. So you want to change signals so that you have better teachers in the future. And what's the signal for that? You want to pay.
Leonardo, I'm not hearing you again. Sorry to interrupt because it's very interesting what you're sharing. But maybe if you can switch the audio off and on again to see whether it works. Yes, thank you. I've just lost
Um,
you, so if you can continue because it's yeah, we lost like 10 seconds. I immediately let you know. So go on, please. Yes.
okay. So what I was saying is that try to use uh, the Minister of Finance, his own kind of arguments to convince him, for example, that an increase in wages for teachers, in fact, is the kind of investment that he, as an economist, would try to do. For example, if he were talking about public works, he would invest in a better highway because this would improve the country's competitiveness. Well, if you're talking about education, you would
Yeah.
invest in better teachers because that's the long-term competitiveness of the country. So you would have to make him think about this better wages for teachers in terms of long-term investment. And that doesn't mean that this is not a huge impact on the public deficit. It is. But if you look at it from an investment point of view, it's an easier debate with the finance ministry. Then you're at least you're talking in the same language, and the debate
Right.
is easier. At the same time, of
Mm-hmm.
course, you have to put yourself in his shoes because it's not enough to win the Ministry of Finance to your side. You have to be part of his problems too. And one of the things that I usually found the other ministers not willing to do is you have to understand the public deficit. For example, when you come to the problem of raising taxes or being responsible with reducing expenditures, usually the rest of the ministers were not really willing to support the Minister of Finance. And that's also not really fair. If you want the Minister of Finance to support you when you're asking for more money, then finance has to feel that you're on his side when he's asking for more money, when he's asking for your support in being responsible in cutting some expenditure. So basically, what I'm saying is that everybody has to feel that they are on the same boat, so that they can really work together. And this is, of course, easier said than done, but it works when you feel that you're really part of the same government and that then you don't have to lie to each other, to use false information, to change your data, to see if you can cheat on the Ministry of Finance to approve your budget and things like that. So that makes for a very much better relationship. And for us, it was really a very good relation with the
Right.
Ministry of Finance, which is not what usually people say about the Ministry of Finance. And the other example I was going to use when going from relation between public institutions to a relation with non-state institutions is a completely different story. Usually, if you're talking from the Ministry of Education, the relationship with the private sector, the traditional relation was getting some money to do some nice but minor things. Uh, it's like charity money. You would get a lot of contributions from the private
Right.
sector to paint a school, to fix the lunch, school programs, to monitor the band of the kids for the football team, for whatever things. A lot of small things that private companies would give money, thousands of many different things. If you look at each of these small things that private companies give money, they are not they were all nice things to do, and each one of them was probably worthy. Uh, but if you look at them from the point of view of the country or from the point of view of the Ministry of Education, they didn't make a difference. I mean, if for example, I say we were going to fix 2,000 schools, and thanks to the private sector, we fixed 2020 schools. That doesn't make a difference.
Right. It's
Or
too
if we
small.
have scholarships for 80, 800,000 students. And thanks to the private sector, instead of 800,000, you have 800,000 and plus 10%. That doesn't make a difference. So the idea we had when we came to the ministry was we wanted to make a difference. And we were lucky enough that in Costa Rica there is this body, it's called Asociación de Empresarios para el Desarrollo, that would translate like a Development Enterprise Association, something like that, that had a new leadership, and Luis Javier Castro from Banco Promérica, and Luis Javier had this very similar idea to the one we had. He wanted to make a difference with the money that the private sector was giving to the government. He wanted to have like a strategic impact, not to be like charity for doing small things, but to have an impact. So we started talking, and the idea we came was to see where that money could do things that the government couldn't do. For example, I would say, following the examples I was saying, for example, I would say, okay, infrastructure for schools. The budget from the ministry is huge for those things. Adding 5% or 6% to that budget, that doesn't make a difference. So don't give me money to paint or to fix or to repair schools, because the public budget is big enough for those things. The problem with the public budget is not the lack of resources. The problem with the public budget is that it is very rigid. It is not very useful to finance new ideas, innovation, things that have to move very quickly. For example, if I have this project to change the math, the way to teach math, and we are starting to think about that, and that's a new idea. A new idea is not next year's budget. If I want to put that into the budget, I have to write it, put it into the next year budget. That takes 6-7 months to be in next year's budget. So you have to have 6 months plus 1 year of budget approval. So it takes 18 months for me to have money. So I have to wait 1.5 years to start doing the change in the math program. If I can have some private money to hire advisors and experts to change the math program, I can do that in 2 or 3 months. So that's how we started to work with the private sector. We would define things that we would want to change in the Ministry of Education, and they would finance this innovations in the processes. And we would start changing the budget for 1.5 years when we would start actually doing the transformations. So this helped us to increase the speed at which a lot of changes would happen in the ministry. So the dynamism that this put into the ministry was really amazing. And this was good for the ministry, and it was impressively good for the private sector, that suddenly started to see that the things they were financing became interesting, became strategic, also became notorious in the public eye. The news were talking about this. It's not the same to say that you painted a school that you contributed to the finance education and public education in Costa Rica. So it made quite a difference.
Great. I think those are both. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. No.
No, I was saying that
I was
great.
going to
I
give
think
one
those
final
two
example
stories. That Go ahead, yeah, share your final one and then we'll walk from there.
Yes, I was going to ask a final example in this because it had a lot to in terms of information, which is one of the topics we were talking about. Um, because one of the things that was lacking in the Ministry of Education was precisely information, and the projects that this relation with the private sector promoted was precisely a project for gathering information at the level of schools. It was a project with three partners: the ministry, this organization of private companies, and a third party, which was an NGO that had been working in one school, developing a software so that each teacher could, in a spreadsheet, put like all the information in his classroom. And it was a tiny project, but very nice, so that a teacher could have the information from his students, the grades he was giving in each different subject. Uh, so looked at that, and the private companies looked at that, and from that tiny project, it evolved a national scale system of information for every school and every high school in Costa Rica. So the nice thing was, you were saying before in education, how the need for information at the level of schools and high schools became a system of national information, because what was beginning to happen was that you would have different information systems in different schools that would not talk to each other, was different software, different indicators. So you would have a
Right.
dispersed
Yeah.
system that would be useless at a national level. So when we put this together with the help of the private sector and the ministry, it became like a national system, useful for the schools, but also useful for the ministry.
Excellent. What a good example of scaling something up and how much can be done with little, right? We don't need to kind of work always with a large, like at the beginning, to think to involve all the stakeholders to do a large thing, but maybe from some very strategic and good complementarities or common approaches, something can emerge that ends up being a big thing. Appreciate the stories, Leonardo. I think that they illustrate really well how important it is to understand the nature of relationships, and in the first case, the need when you're working with other state stakeholders or policymakers, bureaucrats. It's not only about thinking on the evidence in itself, whether it meets a common set of criteria or whether you follow a standardized process, but also the need to understand the different interests and uses of research and evidence, and to be able to really to put into others' shoes and see what does he really need or does she really need to solve, right? And to kind of
Mhm.
frame your interaction through that understanding, and to be able to see this. We within the government, there are different roles and responsibilities, and people use different hats to understand the type of solution or the type of problems that the other might have is key in terms of then interacting and being able to influence that decision using your knowledge or your arguments to kind of anticipate to his or her questions or problems when you're making a proposal or a request. And then in the case of the other stakeholders, also the non-state stakeholders, I think the case you're mentioning, I think it was very good and useful that we're working with a group of private companies. A question I had for you, and then I also invite participants to write their questions too. But a question that I had before listening to you, and I think this example is one where this does not happen, but how can really a governmental agency maximize the potential of working with these non-stakeholders when usually it is a very fragmented and populated field, right? In your case, the good thing is that you were like those stakeholders were already together, even though their contribution was small in terms of the large budget of the ministry. At least they were putting all those, eggs in one basket. But sometimes how can one be inclusive in terms of engaging external stakeholders, but at the same time, right, ensure that there's like efficiency, as you were saying in intervention, that it's the intervention has a quality, and that that the information that is being used is good enough. So, any thoughts about how to approach when these non-state stakeholders that are so dispersed, and sometimes they are not like joining and coming together with wanting to interact or support in a unified way?
Yes. I think that what is very important from the point of view of the public institution is to really know what is it that you want to do. Of course, there will always be small private actors. If you're talking about education in one or another schools, or if you're talking about health in one clinic or whatever. But if you're talking about cooperation with the government, the point is, how do you establish like a strategic relation of cooperation? If it doesn't matter if the private is very small. The question is, okay, you want to
Okay.
establish a relation of cooperation with the government. Uh, how do you become part of a larger process? For example, if I can think of very small local agents that wanted to cooperate with schools in terms of environmental activities. So what we would say is, okay, you want to do something with schools. It's don't do whatever you want to do, but we have this processes already going on. So we'll show you our menu, and then you can choose, but you have to choose from our menu. So you have to
Right,
learn how to
right.
participate within these strategies. And so you have to learn how to work together with us in this strategy. If this doesn't work for you, well, that means we're not fit for each other, but it's not whatever you want to do. It's something that has to mean something for both of us, because it's cooperation. It has to work for both sides, and it usually works very well because it increases the potential of your cooperation, and people
Right.
like that.
Yes,
It
you
means
align
that
align
the same,
resources.
of course, and it's very very powerful.
Right. Powerful. Yes, I agree. And I think this can tie into responding together. Maybe I can also complement what you think about that. Because Olajumoke, you see there that he's asking about what solution we could suggest when there are epistemic communities that have a research agenda that for them it's essential for the development of a state. This clashes with the interest of policymakers. I mean, you were saying that if there is no interest and no alignment, there's no possibility, but that also deters the potential to open up sometimes the agenda of the way of thinking of state, right? Then he also asked about
So,
funding.
so
I can get to that,
of
but maybe I don't.
yes,
Yeah,
of course
yeah.
you can
Go
have
ahead.
you can have an adversarial relation. I will give you an example. We proposed a program of sexual education in Costa Rica, and there was a very large group who opposed the program, and they had this agenda that's conflictual to the government. And if they had asked to participate in the program, I would have said no, and that would have been it. Yes, if there is a
Right.
community with a program that goes against the government program, yes, you cannot part of it, I guess.
Exactly. I think that in terms of if you still, I mean, if that community still feels like this is really essential, sometimes it's also framing or being able to understand better how that is essential for the government agenda as well, right? Or even if it's not explicitly included in the interest of those policymakers, why not? So as to make a stronger argument, or how it could be tied, what this community considers crucial, how could it be better linked to the existing problems and dilemmas that policymakers do have. I think we were trying to give voice to Olajumoke, but it's unfortunately not working. That's why we usually use chat. But since we didn't have any of people today, we wanted to try, but I think we cannot. Olajumoke, if you want to add something to our answers through the chat, maybe that will work better because it's not your mic is not working with the platform. I just want to add in terms of the funding to get local funding and international funding. Again, I think it's so essential. You need to find out a story where you can really argue and demonstrate why that research agenda is so essential for the policy making of your country, um, and get local stakeholders or international donors engage and understand why it's so crucial. I think that maybe your challenge is more about coming up with evidence and strong arguments of why they should pay attention and why they should invest in this research agenda, and linking them to the current and existing problems that both policymakers and donors and supporters care about. I hope this is helpful. I don't know if anyone else has another question or comment. I'll just, if they are not coming in, I'll just add one more question, Leonardo, because we're running out of time, but I'd like to take advantage of you being here. Um, what are your thoughts about how much structure and how much structure should be given to both internal and external relationships? Do you feel like it's better does it make sense to create some more like formal channels to interact, or spaces, or ways to work together? Or, I mean, the state is quite rigid in general. So maybe when we're thinking about relationships, it's better to leave it flexible and have the opportunity, as you had, to work with this group of businessmen and private companies to kind of change their type of support and align them with an idea that you were having, such as trying out a new approach to teach maths, right? I mean, how much there's a tendency sometimes to say that it's better to institutionalize and get formal channels and regular ways of interacting with stakeholders. Maybe it's also internal meetings among ministries. Is it good to formalize and have more regular and structured channels, or do you think that maybe flexibility is a better way? Maybe it's both. I don't know. What are your thoughts about this?
I don't know. It's more like a case by case. Uh, I would give maybe a couple of examples. In Costa Rica, one example that has been very successful in education that started long uh, was in terms of the informatics education program. Because one of the problems you have in terms of government when you try to innovate is governments are relatively short term. I mean, a government is 4 years, and some of the complaints of people is that we don't have like state programs. You have like government programs. They last 4 years, and then comes a new government, and
Right,
everything
right.
changes.
Yeah.
So when
And
you
you start
want
from
something to,
scratch again.
yes, exactly. So sometimes if you want, for example, something to last longer, you need uh, like someone to look after. after it for a longer period. So in the 80s, it was like in 1986, 87, that the Ministry of Education proposed this very innovative informatics education program, and they created an NGO, the Omar Dengo Foundation, uh, which was like the body in charge of executing the program together with the ministry. So you would have the public body, the Ministry of Education, and this NGO working together to promote this program. And at the beginning, and it has always been like a complicated relationship. Some people like it, some people don't like it. But the truth was that in the long term, that was the reason for the success of the program, because sometimes the ministry would push for the program, sometimes it would barely survive, but after 30 years, the program is still there and is very successful. And the reason is that it's institutionalized, but it's very flexible.
Yes.
So I think that that combination, that
Yeah.
having an
Very good
institution,
point.
but not completely independent, is interesting because it gives you both of the things you were asking about: institutionalization, but flexible. Sometimes
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
very
No,
strong,
I
sometimes
like
survives.
so yeah, good point. And I think this time horizon, and to take into account that yes, the difference between like government and state policies, and how to build up schemes so that there's a community out there regardless who is taking charge of government. So in that sense, forming some partnerships makes sense, right? With the needed flexibility. So thanks, Leonardo. I think we really enjoyed and learned a lot from your experience. I'm sure there's a lot more that you could add, but we are reaching the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for being here, and
No, it's a
we'll
pleasure.
share the recorded version with all the interested people. So I'm glad that we have recorded this and we have this to share with others as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, it's always a pleasure, Vanessa.
Excellent. Same here. Buena vida.
Okay.
Yes. So let me all tell you a little bit about what's next. Bye. We plan to jointly with INEASP to pilot in this year. We're exploring some concrete opportunities with some ministries, and we'll also are thinking about whether we can launch a call. And we are interested in getting in touch with public agencies who would like to make an assessment of where they stand in terms of the use of evidence and policy, do this assessment, and based on this prioritize some areas of change and conduct some implementations building on what we have learned throughout the study, building on other practices of different governmental agencies, speakers and participants like Leonardo who have shared experiences. So we really want to see how our lens plays in the ground and helps inform interventions to improve the way public agencies use and produce knowledge for policy. And for that too, we're planning to convene a group of policymakers with relevant experience. We think there's like a lot of capital and knowledge, and especially in developing countries, people who can really help us support others who want to promote changes and create new things and expand then in this way peer-to-peer learning. That's one of our desires for this year. And finally, we also have a course, an online course that's focused on helping agents of change within governmental agencies to promote the use of knowledge in policy. So if you are part of a public agency or know policymakers who could be interested in taking part of the course, we are also exploring opportunities to develop the course specifically for one public agency. So these are all things that are on our radar and wanted to share to so that they are on your radar too in any way that you desire to keep engaged with us. So please do keep in touch. As I mentioned, you are welcome to use this interactive project. There are a lot of things out there that we were not able to share throughout the series, but a lot of very practical tips and ideas, especially if you go to the upper side of the interactive product with all the implications. There are implications for researchers and implications for policymakers and implications for those working in capacity development. So please use them, and whatever you need from us, please get in touch, and we can expand our support, ideas, and knowledge with you. If you haven't been able to attend, you like this webinar and you would like to attend the others, watch the complete webinar series or share it with colleagues whom you think might be interested. So it's always good to have those resources out there. Different dimensions might draw your attention at different stages of your own development. So you have it there, please use it and get in touch with us. If you have any ideas, demands, or comments, we're always ready to receive them. So that being said, thank you to all of you, especially to Leonardo for his excellent examples and reflections. I hope we will continue to explore this field with you by different channels in the future. So with that, I say goodbye, and you will send the recorded version, the link to the recorded version and the PowerPoint to all of you and all those who have subscribed to the webinar today. Bye bye now, and thank you.